Prediction markets, probability markets are the exact opposite. We are there to make risk more manageable. Because the participants in these markets are putting their own money at risk, they have a lot of incentive to be correct because you only get paid if you're correct.
Welcome to the Tippie Leads podcast, stories from the University of Iowa's Tippie College of Business that will change the way you work and lead. Produced by the Tippie Leadership Collaborative. I'm your host, Nick Westergaard. I teach at Tippie and lead our Story Lab program. This podcast provides another opportunity to share stories from Tippie with our community and beyond. Each season of Tippie Leads, we focus on a grand challenge in today's changing world of work. This season, we're looking at risk. Previously, we explored the risks of natural disasters. But not all risks come from physical storms. Some are driven by shifting political and economic winds. For some, these changes bring opportunity. For others, uncertainty. With election season behind us, how do individuals and organizations navigate these risks beyond voting? One way is by predicting outcomes. Tippie's Tom Gruca, through the Iowa electronic markets, has developed a remarkably accurate method for doing just that. In this episode, Tom will explain how these markets work and how they can help organizations navigate risk. Then we'll hear from Tippie undergrad Anna Makarenko on dealing with uncertainty while in high school in Ukraine. And finally, we'll bring it all together with a final Tip E just for you. Ready? Let's get started. Tom Gruca is the George Daly Professor in Marketing at the University of Iowa's Tippie College of Business. His research focuses on healthcare, prediction markets, and the interface between marketing and finance. He also leads Iowa Electronic Markets, a research platform for prediction markets, which has become a widely recognized tool for forecasting political outcomes. Gruca has published extensively in academic journals and is a sought-after speaker on the topics of market behavior and the use of prediction markets in decision-making. So, Tom, you and I both teach marketing, but it's sort of like a Venn diagram because then there's other things that are Nick things and Tom things, and I will confess, I don't know a lot about Iowa electronic markets. So for those like me, the unfamiliar, what are probability markets and how do they work?
Sure. So I'm going to start with a really quick story. Back in 1988, we had a couple of, there's three economists and a political scientist go to a bar. It sounds like the start of a joke, but it's the start of one of the longest running social science experiments at the University of Iowa. And on that day, Jesse Jackson came out of nowhere and almost won the Michigan primary. And these guys are sitting around saying, you know, what's going on here? Why did the polls get this so wrong? This is something we hear all the time. And they said to themselves, is there some other way we could aggregate information about a future event and get that information before the event happens? And the economists said, well, that's what markets do. And so they set about creating a market where you're buying and selling things, but instead of buying and selling, let's say, stocks or bonds, you would be buying and selling contracts, which have a value if an event happens. Let's say it's $1 if the event happens, and it's $0 if the event does not happen. And so on that day, they put together the Iowa, what they used to call the Iowa political stock market, now the Iowa electronic markets. And they started that fall and, came up with this market and recruited people from basically the campus. And they set up the market so you would predict what would happen on election day in terms of the popular vote. And lo and behold, we wouldn't be talking today unless the market did a better job than polls. And it did a great job. It was like less than 1% error. And the polls were all over the place in that particular election. And theoretically, this should always have worked, but no one ever bothered to try it. So they did it. It worked. And as I say, the rest is history. And we've been running these markets for both presidential elections and between presidential election, off-year elections, on who's going to, presidential elections, who's going to control the House, who's going to control the
Right.
Senate, and things of
The
that nature.
midterms.
Yeah, the midterms. So, and those are coming up. I mean, we're going to be opening up those markets like in the not too distant future.
Yeah. So this season on Tippie Leads, we're talking about risk. So what role does risk play in probability markets?
This is an outstanding question because people have been asking me since I've started working on these. Oh, isn't this just gambling? No, it's not gambling. And here's why it's not. Gambling is the creation of risk for your entertainment purposes, right? Because, in 2 days, well, maybe it's already started. Uh, the NCAA tournament's going to happen, and so is going to play so and so, and there's no risk there unless it's your team and they, get bounced by, Dayton or something. And it's like, oh, I'm sad. We're not going to go to the big dance. Fine. But there's no risk. But now that we've added gambling, you've created a risk where no risk was beforehand. And there are only two reasons to create risk in this situation. Number one, for entertainment purposes for the gambler. And number two, to enrich the people that take the bets, because they set the money, they set the lines so that they make money, win or lose, no matter who wins or loses. So prediction markets, probability markets are the exact opposite. We are there to make risk more manageable and to make them go away. So for example, think back to last June. I know it's very hard because things have happened since last June, but imagine you have a large portfolio of businesses that you invested in as a, let's say, mutual fund manager, and you're saying to yourself, I have a whole bunch of electric vehicle and clean energy and solar companies. What's going to happen in November? Well, depending on what happens in November, we're either going to go even more into green energy, or there may be a big break put on it. So you would really like to know who's going to win the election. Now, you can open up your newspaper and it'll say, oh, candidate A is going to win. And then you open up the newspaper tomorrow, it says, nope, candidate B is going to win. So what do you do? Because the participants in these markets are putting their own money at risk, they have a lot of incentive to be correct, because you only get paid if you're correct. So for that reason, prediction markets are looked to as a actual risk reduction methodology, because the nice thing about them, they're continuous. In general, they account for issues in polling, and it gives you the answer early enough, depending on the situation, that you can do something about it. Because if it's election eve and you say, wow, this could go either way, well, it's too late to sell your solar stocks, right? You want to sell them before everyone knows what's going to happen. So it's not something that you would necessarily use as the only thing in your portfolio of tools to understand risk, but it's another thing for you to add to. You might have statistical models, you might have all kinds of other ways to think about what's going to happen in the future. This is just another tool, which happens to be have a long run, highly accurate track record in prediction what's going to happen in the future.
You've mentioned that a couple of times in terms of the accuracy. Is there a quick answer as to the why versus, like you said, opening the newspaper, candidate A, and then the next day candidate B? They seem to swing back and forth. Is there a go-to reason why probability markets do such a better job?
Sure. Well, when the pollster finally gets a hold of you, because you're going to block them on your phone, and this is one of the problems with polls, is you are telling them what you wish will happen. In your heart of hearts, who am I going to vote for? It's like the person I want to lead the country, right? Unless you're one of these mythical strategic voters who tells the opposite. I don't think there are any such people. But anyway, but the participants in these probability markets are different. They might favor one candidate or another, but by being rational, and they're incentivized to be rational because they're putting their money literally where their mouth is. In their hearts, they may love candidate A, but they know that person's going to get trounced on election day, so they're going to invest in candidate B. And so it's the difference between your heart and your mind. When it's your heart, that's what polling really is, and when it's your mind, because you're laying down your own money. This isn't funny money. This is actual your own
Right,
money that you
right.
sent in. You're going to say, you're going to put your emotions aside and say, yeah, this is the person I think is going to win.
Interesting. So the EV example that you talked about was fascinating. Are there other examples of organizations using prediction markets, whether internal or otherwise, to assess future risks or opportunities?
So that's a good question. There are a number of interesting examples. Probably one of the most interesting is an agency, a research and development agency in the federal government, was trying to figure out how do people become good forecasters. So people might be familiar with the super forecasters research. And in addition to people just writing down their forecasts, they also had people um, participate in prediction markets based on these different political events, geopolitical events they're trying to forecast, like changes in government. Will so and so stay, in power? Will these people stay in this, economic consortium, and things of that nature? And they found that, in general, they do, a better job than any individual. So putting the brains together of a lot of smart people and letting them interact in a market setting actually does a better job than just asking one expert or even one small set of experts. So that was actually done by the federal government trying to figure out. We keep getting surprised by things, and people are tired of being surprised. They're like, there must be information out there, so let's find the best way to put that together. Other companies. When we were the only people doing this years ago, people would look at our midterm elections, especially, and look at those and try to figure out, who's going to control Congress. Is it going to be, one party controls everything, or is it going to be a split? And the people who were really interested in this were bond traders, because if one party controls all elements of the government, the House, the Senate, and the presidency, there is a tendency throughout history to go berserk and just spend, turn on the money machines. And if you're holding bonds, that's not good, because it's going to cause inflation, and then your bonds are worth less. So they're always voting for a split, right? They would like it to be split so that there has to be compromise and not everybody gets everything they want. They actually don't necessarily care who gets, what it is, but they like to have a split. So even financial companies, they have a lot of other tools that they use, but prediction markets and probability markets are something they still use to figure out, what's going to be happening in the House and Senate. And they would like to know now what's going to happen 2 or 3 years from now, because they're trading bonds, some of which have 10-year, 20-year horizons, right? So if you see, and if you anticipate that, the fiscal policy is going to go, wild, and inflation is going to go way up, so that means that the Fed's going to have to jack up interest rates again, and that's going to make all of your bonds worth less. I'd rather know that today than know it as it happens. We just had a Fed meeting this morning, right? And they said we're not going to do anything. So knowing that 6 months from now, 6 months before it happens, is better than you're biting your nails as this as you're waiting for the Fed to do the smoke and tell you what's going to happen.
So earlier you mentioned some of the controversy, that's just gambling.
Mm-hmm.
So with it being a controversial area, are there ethical risk, regulatory considerations to think about with probability markets?
Absolutely. We are we operate under a set of restrictions. We have what's called a no action letter from the CFTC. That's the regulators for uh, futures markets, and we're considered a futures market. So there's certain things we can't do. You can't invest more than $500. You can't. We can't advertise. We can only run markets on certain things, and we never step out of those boundaries. Other organizations have stepped out of those boundaries and have brought the thunder down on top of themselves. And we stay away from that. We stay within our lane. With the change in administrations, who knows what's going to happen because there are ongoing lawsuits. There are regulatory things going on, which were supposed to be wrapped up, but who knows what's happened to those. So every once in a while, the regulators they have shut some of these down in the past, and they've been trying to shut down some people that do markets similar to ours. But we're so small, um, and we stay within our lane. They've pretty much left us alone. Others, you may notice, are outside the U.S. They're domiciled outside the U.S. so that U.S. regulators have no say. But that doesn't always happen if they find out that you're actually putting in money from the U.S. I don't care how clever you are. Nothing on the internet's a secret. So if they find that out, they can go shut them down, even though they're domiciled outside the U.S. Because you're violating U.S. laws by accepting money, which you can know is from the U.S. So there's a lot of things that go back and forth with the regulation. The ethical part that people worry about is if these are so accurate. Will people look at them and say, "Oh, my candidate's doing very poorly on these markets. I'm not going to go vote." I, you're not much of a fan of your candidate if some, people gambling, will make you say, "Well, I'm going to stay home on election day." And at the same time, if I were the candidate who's losing on the prediction markets, I would use that as a spur to say, "Listen, let's make these people wrong." So I doubt most people aren't that aware of them, and I'm not sure they're really shaping their behavior in any meaningful way.
Managing political risk is one thing, but what happens when a global pandemic disrupts immigration, leaving individuals stranded and uncertain about their futures? Tippie undergrad Anna Makarenko experienced this as a high school student in Ukraine. She shared her powerful story at our Spring 2023 Story Lab showcase.
I was born in Ukraine, lived a pretty normal life. Me and my older sister, we went to school, my mom worked as an English tutor, and my dad worked for a company that provided chicken house equipment all over the world. He'd go to Turkey, China, Egypt, Eastern European countries, and also he went to United States. He would spend 3 months in United States, go back home for a week. Come back to the US for 3 months, go back home for a week. That was in a very healthy situation for a family. So his employers, aka our future friends, asked him if he'd like to bring the family over, and he did. The first 2 years of being here were filled with a bunch of boring paperwork, filing documents, waiting for approvals, filing documents, waiting for approvals. All of a sudden, our lives changed. We get a phone call from our immigration lawyer saying, "Your parents have to leave ASAP because we could not renew their visas. And if they stay here, they're going to be banned from immigration at least for 3 years." So my parents left, which leaves me and my older sister, at that time 14 and 16 years old, alone in the United States. Of course we had legal guardians, but they lived in a neighboring town, and we'd go buy groceries with them a few times a month. But for the next 7 months, me and my sister, we were in the US, we lived in a house by ourselves, on a whole different continent away from the rest of the family. We continued to go to school, stay active with our extracurricular activities, do all the typical teenager stuff. But then, of course, we also had a bunch of adult responsibilities added to our daily list of tasks. We'd go grocery shopping, we would cook for ourselves, we'd do our laundry, we'd clean, and also we had to take care of our dog. Finally, we get another call from the lawyer saying, "Well, your papers are now ready, you can go to Ukraine, go to the embassy, do a quick visit, and, get your passports and come back. The whole trip shouldn't take more than, let's say, 3 weeks. So we get our things packed up, we go to Ukraine. One of the parts for immigration, requirements for immigration, is you have to do detailed physical exam. And it includes an x-ray, picture, x-ray of your chest. For some reason, mine and my dad's x-ray had little dots on our lungs. And they made us do extra testing, which would require us to stay in Ukraine for extra 2 months. Well, we had no choice. We stayed in Ukraine for another 2 months. When we got the results back, of course, as the doctor said, you guys are healthy, you guys are good, it's just a requirement we had to do for the US. If you were going to Canada, we just let you in, but it's a requirement. So when we get our results back, we bring them back to the embassy, and they say, please give us 10 days to work through the papers. 10 days, right? I mean, compared to 2 months before, that's nothing. We're so excited. We're going to be getting back to the US soon, getting back to our dog, to our family, to our jobs, to schools, And we were so excited. On the 9th day, everything got shut down because of COVID-19, including the embassies. Our family did not know what to do. My parents did not have their jobs in Ukraine. My sister could not go to Ukrainian university because she didn't take the exams required for admission to Ukrainian university. I was in the middle of my high school career, and our dog was staying in the US with our friends. After the 2 consecutive proclamations that were banning immigration in the US, we realized that this is going to take a lot more time than we expected. And I realized I'm going to have to go back to my Ukrainian school, where I would be graduating, because in Ukraine we only have 11 years of school, which meant that I had to get caught up on 3 years of missed Ukrainian curriculum in 1 year. And let me remind you, it was COVID year, everything was online. And in Ukraine, we did not have a very good structure for online learning. So it was incredibly difficult. And it might seem like this is very stressful and it's a hard time for my family. At first, the 2 years of boring paperwork, and then living in the US by ourselves with my 16-year-old sister, then going to Ukraine, having a medical exam, and then COVID hitting, and then a ban on immigration for 60 days, and then another ban on immigration for 60 days, and then going back to school, and then prepping for the exams, and then my dog in the US breaks his paw and has to get a surgery, and then my dad in Ukraine breaks his back for the second time in his lifetime. And then a bunch of mental health battles that each one of my family members had to fight through and push through because of all the stress that's been put on our family and all the risks that my family has taken. My parents gave up everything, and I mean everything, to get a chance to come here. And then, of course, my graduation in Ukraine. After we got our passports, after waiting a year and a half to get our passports, we could not wait to come back to the US. We bought the first airplane tickets that we found, and that was actually 5 days after my high school graduation. So in that short period of time, I had to finish up some things, finish filing the graduation papers requirements for to get the diploma, and then get my wisdom teeth removed. And then, pack up my suitcase with only books. And I mean only books. There were 27 of them, no clothes. Because our lives were still in the US. For a year and a half, we were kind of, hanging in the air, just existing. And when we finally got the chance to come back, we did not want to wait or think about materialistic things. We wanted to get back, and we did. Throughout this journey, I learned the most important lesson in my life. No matter what life throws at you, no matter how difficult it might seem, you have to keep pushing. You have to keep fighting through it. It might seem like you're the unluckiest person in the world, but trust me, that is not true. You have to be open-minded and accept your challenges with grace. And you will see how your life will turn around. Thank you.
That was Anna Makarenko, live at our Spring 2023 Story Lab Showcase in downtown Iowa City. You can watch the video of Anya's story and other Tippie storytellers via the link in this week's show notes. Before we wrap up, let's go back to Tom Gruca one last time for a final tip E for you to remember in your work.
Here's the thing to remember. The only thing that matters for a probability market is the people who are holding the contract for the event that actually happens gets paid. So the people that are right get paid. That's the only thing that has to happen. But what is nice is that sometimes, but not always, the prices that you see, the probabilities that you see, tell you what's going to happen in the future, but that's not always true. So that's neither a necessary or sufficient condition for this to work. As they say in mathematics, the only thing that matters is the people that are right get paid. Sometimes the prices could be wildly off, and sometimes they could be dead on. And it sounds like it's an old technology since it's been around since '88. It actually isn't. It's so new compared to polling and statistical models. We're still working out what are the conditions under which it works and it doesn't. So don't put all your faith in these, and it's too new of a tool to use as your exclusive tool to manage risk.
We've looked at high-stakes risks like natural disasters and shifting political winds. But for many, risks are more everyday concerns, like driving. Insurers have looked for ways to encourage safer driving to reduce their costs, including offering premium discounts for good driving habits monitored by in-car sensors. However, despite the potential savings, many drivers remain resistant to these devices. In our next episode, Tippie's Richard Peter explains why driving sensors haven't gained traction, even when they could help customers save money. This episode of Tippie Leads was written and produced by me, Nick Westergaard, and Steve Courtwright. Special thanks to Tom Gruca and Anna Makarenko for taking the calculated risk of sharing their stories. Tippie Leads is a production of the Tippie Leadership Collaborative. To learn more, go to tippie.uiowa.edu/Tippie Leads. If you like this episode, share it with a friend or coworker, or better yet, subscribe to the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you like to listen. And if you're feeling generous, consider leaving us a rating or review to help others find the show. This is Nick Westergaard signing off. On behalf of everyone at Tippie, thanks for listening, and go Hawks!